תודה רבה. ערב טוב, שלום לכם, ברוכים הבאים למוזיאון ישראל בירושלים. גבירותיי ורבותיי, מכובדיי כולם, מכיוון שנמצאים איתנו הערב כמות גדולה של אורחים מחול, אנו מבקשים ברשותכם לערוך את הערב בשפה האנגלית. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. In view of the large number of guests from overseas, with your permission, we will conduct this event in English. My name is Dana Somberg. I am a journalist and a TV reporter at Channel 2 and a member of the Bronfman Youth Fellowship program here in Israel. I have a special place in my heart for the Bronfman program as I believe it had a significant impact on my life. The program introduced me to a variety of people from different cultures and gave me a whole new perspective of my Jewish identity. I am very excited to be here today and I'm honored to be part of the Bronfman heritage.
Thank you, Donna. Good evening. I'm Steve Lindy, Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Post, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you as we pay tribute to a very special man, Edgar Bronfman. Bruchim habayim. A special welcome to the Bronfman family and to you, Matthew Bronfman, who, like your father, has become a great Jewish leader and a great friend of Israel and the Jewish people. We have developed a special relationship through the Jerusalem Post, and in this context, I'd also like to extend a personal welcome to the Jerusalem Post CEO, Ronit Chassin. I think you will all appreciate the beautiful magazine in tribute to Edgar Bronfman that we have produced for this evening's event under the very professional editorship of Asher Weil. Thank you so much, Asher. We are gathered here this evening to celebrate and remember the life of Edgar Miles Bronfman. This audience needs no introduction to the giant of a man who left an indelible imprint on so many factors of life. As an industrialist and businessman of world proportions, as a statesman and diplomat, as a dedicated leader of the Jewish world, and perhaps above all, as the head of a loving family. We would like to acknowledge the help and cooperation of several people who are present here with us tonight. Our sponsors, Dinah Rauscher, the Executive Director of the Samuel Bronfman Foundation, who has come all the way from New York. Lilach Asher Tupilsky, the CEO of the Israel Discount Bank. Shalom Fisher of IKEA Israel. Dr. Yossi Chechanova, the founding chairman of Hillel Israel. Ronen Plott, the Director General of the Knesset, Dr. Nona and Misha Schneerson, Vice President of Limmud FSU, Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, the President of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, Avishai Braverman, whose support and concern have been invaluable. The initiator of this evening's event, Chaim Chesler, the founder of Limmud FSU, together with Avraham Infeld, chairman of Hillel Israel, and Rabbi Michel Tzion, co-director of the Bronfman Youth Fellowship. It is now my privilege and pleasure to introduce the director of the Israel Museum, James Snyder, who is hosting us here this evening to say a few words of greeting.
Good evening to all of you. Stephen, thank you for that introduction. I just want to make a small correction. In a way, we're your host this evening, but more than that, or more simply than that, we're your venue. And we're your venue for a reason, actually, that has a great deal to do with the Bronfman family. And for this reason, we are a bit touched and a bit honored that this celebration is taking place here just now. I think Edgar wasn't yet 30 years old when he and his sisters, Minda and Phyllis, and his brother Charles decided that they would honor their father Sam's 70th birthday by making possible the archaeology wing of the Israel Museum when it opened in 1965. And the Samuel Bronfman Archaeology Wing was actually the first wing of the museum to open. And there are magnificent pictures of Sam Bronfman sitting on the dais with Teddy Kollek and with David Ben-Gurion on that opening occasion, and it must have been magnificent, and all of the children were there, and Edgar was there. And I think many of you walked through what is now the Samuel and Sadie Bronfman Archaeology Wing, which was renewed along with the rest of the museum 4 years ago by members of the now extended Bronfman family. Matthew, who is here this evening with his wife Stacy, is very active with our American friends. Their daughter Tess, his daughter Tess, becomes a fourth-generation member of the Bronfman family to know well a museum that is not yet 50 years old. Edgar's interests in the Jewish world went well beyond the Israel Museum. You all know that from his great many other commitments and interests in the Jewish world. And yet, as I say, it touches us to realize that we were and remain a part of that landscape. And as broad as that landscape is worldwide, for culture to be a piece of it is something that's very meaningful for us. So we are pleased, touched, and honored to be your venue this evening, and we hope that you will enjoy what follows as a celebration of Edgar's life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Now I have the honor to introduce Rabbi Mishael Zion, co-director of the Bronfman Youth Fellowships.
תנו רבנן, אלו קראים שאין מתאחין, הקורא על אביו ועל אמו ועל רבו שלימדו תורה ועל נשיא בישראל. Our rabbis taught, and these are tears that are never mended. One who tears for his father, for his mother, for his teacher who taught him Torah, for the leader of the community. We are gathered here today in Jerusalem, in the heart of the Jewish people, to remember a father, a teacher, a leader of the community, Edgar Bronfman, Yechiel Moshe ben Shmuel Vesedi. 10 weeks ago, the Bronfman family brought Edgar to his final rest. For his children, his grandchildren, his wife, it is a personal tear that will never be mended. And for us, from New York to Tel Aviv, from Yerushalayim to the former Soviet Union, Edgar Bronfman's life touched millions, shaped world history, and generated a Jewish renaissance. To many of us, he was a friend, a teacher, a colleague, a beacon of Jewish leadership in the modern world. But Edgar was never one to dwell on loss. Hope, not fear, was his creed, a calling for the Jewish people to build a more learned, proud, and inclusive Jewish life. His investment in young people in Israel, America, and across the world is a testament to that faith. For us, then, the tear that is not mended is the unfinished work of Edgar's legacy. As we celebrate his life tonight, his teachings, his good deeds, and his good humor, we realize it is our turn. As Edgar often quoted, "It is not upon you to finish the work, nor are you free to desist from it either. לא עליך המלאכה לגמור, ולא אתה בן חורין להיבטל ממנה. תהא נשמתו צרורה בצרור החיים, may his soul be bound up in the bind of the living."
Being Jewish to me means I'm a member of a family that goes back to Abraham. Being Jewish to me means I have certain ethics that I follow. And being Jewish to me means that there are certain precepts that I believe in, like Tikkun Olam, and being God's partner in creation. I think that the most important thing we can do is through education. We have to understand that we have to love our neighbors as ourselves. You can't be proud in a vacuum. You have to know what you're proud of. Therefore, knowledge is terribly important.
I was 10 years old when the war started, 1939 in Canada. I was so excited about the creation of the state and so wildly proud of Israel during the Six-Day War, so that we all felt that, that it was fantastic that we were all Jews together.
Oh, I'm for peace. I think for peace is absolutely the most vital thing. Peace with honor, peace with dignity, peace with security. The World Jewish Congress was the only international Jewish organization that had all the Eastern European countries, with the exception of the Soviet Union, as members. And that we could perhaps do something to get the Jews out of the Soviet Union. Because all my grandparents came from that country, I felt I owed their memory something. The issue really has never been money, as far as I'm concerned. The twin things that I sort of really work on is justice and the truth. I want to find the truth of what happened during this whole period from 33 on into the 40s. And I want to find justice for those who perished or those whose relatives have some money that was put there. But I enjoy helping people. It fulfills my life. Making money is wonderful, and building a business is wonderful. But going beyond that, there has to be something. I'm very proud to have started this. I'm even prouder that I had the intelligence to keep my hands off it and let the professionals do a really wonderful job. My message is that it's wonderful to be Jewish. It's wonderful to know who you are.
I wrote about my father in our annual report that he made the place better than he found it. And if my children can say that about me, that's enough.
Good evening. My name is Katya. I was born and raised in Moscow, and at the age of 13, when I learned that I'm Jewish, my life changed. But when, in 2006, my friends called me to volunteer at some project that they called Limmud, I came there, and Limmud became a part of my Jewish life. I had Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, then there was Limmud, Hanukkah, and so on. At 2006, when I was volunteering at the first FSU Limmud in Moscow, I was standing at the entrance, and I think I met Matthew Bronfman. That time I wasn't wearing glasses. In 2008, when I was at Limmud FSU in Jerusalem, I made my right decision to make Aliyah, so I live here now. And me and my husband, we've never missed any Limmud, except for the last year, when at the day when Limmud was opening, our son was born, so we had a good reason. And I'm really grateful for Limmud and the Bronfman family for all the good decisions and events that happened in my life. And I'm happy that it's that. And I'm really happy to introduce the next speaker, Yuli Edelstein. He was born and grew up in Ukraine. A Zionist activist, he was refused permission to immigrate and imprisoned in the Soviet Gulag in 1984. He was one of the last refuseniks to be released and came to Israel in 1985. A member of the Likud party, he was elected to the Knesset in 1996 and became Speaker of the Knesset in 2013. I'm pleased to invite to the stage the member of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein.
Thank you, Katya. Matthew, Tess, the whole Bronfman family, all the distinguished guests, and the organizers. I think it's really mission impossible to start summing up the long and intensive life Edgar had with all the different areas of interest. Were I here in my capacity as the Knesset speaker, I would have to generalize and address all the issues and all the activities that Edgar had. And I won't do that, because I'm here as Yuli Edelstein. And I'll take you back to 1980,
1987, Katya just made one mistake. I was still in prison in 85. I was released in 87. March 1987, I was in Siberia, and I heard that story about 1,000 times from my wife. She could probably tell it better, but she's unable to, so I'll have to tell it in her name. There were 3 prisons of Zion left at that time in the former Soviet Union. Edgar arrived with the group of people, both from his business and the World Jewish Congress. He had a broken leg after some ski accident or something. So my wife was very impressed that he was accompanied by a couple of doctors, but he still came. And except for selling Seagram or buying something from the Russians, he obviously spoke to them about the Jews and the prisoners of Zion. And the Russians, I guess, even those days knew how to put a show. They staged it well. Bronfman and his entourage were meeting with the families of the prisoners of Zion and the long-time refuseniks in an apartment in Moscow. And as my wife always said, that they felt something was, like there was something in the air. So at some stage the phone rang at the apartment, and the hostess answered the phone, and she came back to the room where everyone's sitting, pretty surprised. And she said they just released Yosef Berenstein, who was a prisoner of Zion, one of the 3. They just released Yosef Berenstein from the camp. One of the people accompanying Edgar, that was the part of the story my wife liked less, turned to her and said, "Oh, damn it, we were sure it would be your husband." Did we say already, Kol hamatzil nefesh echad miYisrael? He saved many more lives than just one life, and I'm pretty sure that part of all these efforts, his and the efforts of the others, was one of the reasons of my release a couple of months later, and probably even, I would dare say, the fact that Iron Curtain fell down at some stage was no accident either. But that's not enough, because I think if we are talking about someone who really cares about something, he did continue. The easiest way out would be to celebrate the victory, and the victory was great. I guess Edgar celebrated the victory, but he continued. And February 89, I was invited by the World Jewish Congress to accompany them to the then Soviet Union, just a year and a half after my release, to Moscow for the opening of the first Jewish Cultural Center. It was still the Soviet Union, it was still Moscow. The government even didn't want to send an official representative to that strange event, opening of the Jewish Center. Edgar was already there with the vision of the continuation, with the Jewish education. And it went on and on. And one thing I can say with these things that Matthew and Chaim are doing today in the FSU, and Katya, whom I see for the first time, but many, many others, thousands, wouldn't be standing here, definitely not in Israel, not in Jerusalem, if it were not for these efforts. I think for me it shows that it was not just because it was some kind of political activity, just because it was popular those days, just because, it brought you probably some headlines. It was a deep, lifelong commitment. So I apologize for not talking about Edgar as a successful businessman. Some other people would do that. I apologize, James, that I can't, definitely not better than you, describe his involvement and his family involvement with this museum. There are many others who could talk about different other aspects. For me, it's Edgar Bronfman. And I guess I have to say, for me, it's Edgar Bronfman and the Soviet Jewry and the Russian Jewry. That's wrong. For me, it's Edgar Bronfman and many, many, many thousands and dozens of thousands of Yuli Edelsteins who are Jewish today because his life was really a life of achievement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edelstein. Mr. Edelstein has to leave us now. Thank you for your speech. Now I want to introduce you Yonatan Razel. He's a pianist, singer, and composer who studied under Professor Mendy Rodan at the Jerusalem Academy of Music and has since set out on a musical career combined with Jewish studies in a Jerusalem Kollel. His song, Katonti, was nominated as Song of the Year for 2014. Yonatan.
Good evening, everybody. My grandfather, Professor Mark Roslar, was my teacher for cello and Latin when I was a young boy. He jumped off the train on the way to Sobibor and miraculously was saved. Before he died, he called me close and said, there's one verse in the Torah that I'm really connected to. It's the prayer of Yaakov before he met his brother, Esav. And he was scared, coming back from the way where he fled from. And he noticed he used to have nothing, and now he's an empire. And he was praying to God to protect him. I never met Edgar, but I'm sure that at the end of his life, he probably felt this way. This song is called Hatzileni Na. It's the prayer of Yaakov Avinu. Before
Thank you, Yonatan Razel. The following two short tributes were specially recorded by President Shimon Peres and former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. They were first shown at the memorial tribute to Edgar Bronfman held at Lincoln Center in New York in January.
Edgar came from the Lions. Fearless, hopeful, a born leader. Yet, he was a man of deep convictions, never reluctant to face the truth. He was a leader of our people and a spokesman for our justice. He wasn't afraid to argue with non-Jewish people, but also he wasn't afraid to argue with the Jews as well. He went from country to country, from leader to leader, to tell them that they have to fight anti-Semitism, to tell them the suffering of the Jewish people, straight and direct and respected. As you know, he was a charismatic person, tall, with blue eyes, impatient to nonsense, but always devoted to the point. We shall miss him as a great person, as a strong Jewish leader, that his real wealth was not necessarily money, but service to his people. Will God bless his memory.
What an extraordinary tribute and celebration this has been, to hear from so many heartfelt words about Edgar and his family and his service, to hear the wisdom and compassion of Shimon Peres. I am honored and privileged to join with Jan, with Edgar's children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and the entire Bronfman family, and so many friends from around the world, as we say farewell to a champion for justice and human dignity, a loving and generous spirit, and a dear friend. My family has been fortunate to share in Edgar's warmth and affection for many years. Bill and I got to know him, spend time with him, and work with him. And we will always be grateful for the friendship that he and Jan forged with Chelsea and Mark. They showed our daughter and son-in-law special kindness and supported their marriage and their future together. He was a man who understood faith, and he had faith first and foremost in his Jewish faith, but he also recognized and appreciated those who had faith as well, who could bring their blessings and gifts to work on behalf of the better world that Edgar sought.
Now I would like to introduce Sanya Koritor. Is a virtuoso violinist and composer who came to Israel in 1992 and performs extensively in Israel and abroad. Sanya opened this evening with a special piece that he composed called Memories. Now we will hear Jewish Tears.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rosie Purr, and I'm honored to stand here today in front of you and tell you my personal story about how Hillel Israel literally changed my life and perspective over Judaism. I was born in Georgia, the country in Eastern Europe, not the States, and I moved to Israel when I was 5 years old. Now, in case you're not familiar with the Georgian community in Israel, it's very traditional and strict. Growing up, Judaism for me was a kind of limitations book. What you have to do, what you should never do. Yes or no, black or white. And especially when it came to the role of a female in society, the traditional role, my expectations and my aspirations did not quite match those values. I wanted to wear mini skirts and read Wall Street Journal, and I was dreaming about building my own company one day. But the community did not accept it. When I started my BA, I joined Hillel at IDC. And through some really interesting projects and trips and Shabbat dinners, notably Call Hillel, which was a project where I got to meet Jews from different walks of life, different countries, different beliefs, I realized something big. Judaism is rich, Judaism is many colors and shapes and forms, and we can all take a piece of it and connect to it our own way. And thank you, Hillel Israel, for that, for making me feel like I belong again, that I can connect to my Jewish identity. And I'd just like to mention that Mr. Bronfman's vision keeps on inspiring us year after year to continue working to strengthen the Jewish identity of Israelis as well, just like me, so they can also feel like they belong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosie. It's now my honor to invite the Executive Director of the Israeli Public Council for Soviet Jewry and the founder of Limmud FSU, Chaim Chesler.
I was Executive Director of Israeli Public Council for Soviet Jewry 20 years ago. I heard Yuli Edelstein and his story, what he understood when he was in prison and after he was released, that Edgar took him to Russia. I had the privilege to tell you the story when Yuli Edelstein was still in prison, which we made a campaign to get him out and to get all the other prisoners of Zion. And that's how I started to know Edgar Bronfman, which is a little bit impatient for nonsense, talking to the point like a proper businessman, don't have time from something which is not giving results right away. And he called me and he said, Chaim, I'm coming to Israel. I want to meet A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and this timetable, and I want to come in 4 days, and I want everybody to be on time, like I'm his soldier, which I was. And he came, and he took all the necessary details that when he go to Russia or when he have all the connection to try to help the people. There, the prisoners and the refuseniks. One he likes in particular, I didn't know why, but he mentioned to me more than once the name Yuli Edelstein. And I was doing my best to help him and to help all the others. Only at a later stage I understood what Yuli Edelstein said on this very stage a few minutes ago. I'm sorry he's not here to hear it, but he knows all these stories which we met so many times before. But what was amazing, that when he arrived, and I had the privilege as the Executive Director of Israeli Public Council for Soviet Jewry in Israel to make the welcome ceremony at the airport, I pick up to New York, and I asked Edgar, why don't you come to Israel to participate in these ceremonies? And he told me the very Edgar answer, I am not for ceremonies, I'm for action. I always remember that. For me, it's Edgar. And for me, that was really a teaching how a leader should be, and the kind of sample he gave to others. And the very fact that it was not just the struggle for Soviet Jewry, it's not just running after the Swings Bank's money, it's not just after Kurt Waldheim, but for him was, and I understood it from many conversations I had with him, is about the future. What about the future, the young generation, the Hillel, the Bronfman Fellowship, and in any way you can help to make Jews remain Jewish, especially the young generation. So since I was the privilege to meet Edgar and his son Matthew in Spain some 9 years ago, I came to Matthew whom I didn't know. I said, Matthew, I have a project for you, that you will continue the legacy of your father, of youngsters and education. And by mistake, I didn't know. I'll tell him, let's have it in Kishinev. I didn't know that the family, Sam, come from Moldova. And Matthew, I remember, told me at that 9 years ago, you know what, you touch my heart because it's Moldova, I'll give you some money, but if you no good, don't get near me. If you go, wherever you go, we go. And thank God we are now 9 years together. We started in Moscow in 2006, together with Aaron Frankel, who did with us here in Dom Uchonok, the House of Science. We brought 1,000 people to learn Judaism and to exercise their right to be Jewish among themselves. And thanks to the support of Matthew and Aaron and the Schneers, Dr. Nona, which present here with her husband Misha, and many other good people. Now we operate Limmud FSU in 10 countries for Russian-speaking youngsters around the world. And the accomplishment that we do, we keep the youngster Jewish, and the best sample you saw Katya. Katya saw Aaron Frankel and Matthew Bronfman in Moscow, and now she's having a family in Israel, both of them active in Limmud in Moscow, and now they're running Limmud in Israel. And without the support of the Bronfmans, midor ledor, from generation to the generation, the message of Edgar went to Matthew and will continue to his own children. And I want to end up by saying that we are very honored that Rabbi Yuli Edelstein is also joining the wagon to continue the Jewish legacy of keeping the young Jews, for Russian-speaking Jews, alive all over the world.
Thank you, Mr. Chesler. Now I have the honor to invite President Emeritus Hillel International, Chairman of the Board of Directors, Hillel of Israel, Mr. Avraham Infeld. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm not only here as the chairman of the Hillels of Israel. I had no idea that I was going to speak. I'm a pinch hitter. I'm replacing Edgar Bronfman, Matthew's brother, who made every attempt to get here, but unfortunately for reasons beyond his control could not do it. But I spoke to Adam, and he asked me if I would speak in his place. He asked me not to talk in his name, to talk as I would talk at an evening honoring his father, but he did tell me what he would have said. So as a public speaker who loves to hear his own voice, I'm going to do both. I think I know what Adam would have said was he here. I think he would have spoken about his father's pride in what Matthew is doing with the former Soviet, with the Limmud in the former Soviet Union. I know that he would have spoken with great pride in the Bronfman Fellowship. It was Adam who showed me how strategically his father worked. He supported mass organizations like Limmud, like Hillel, like the World Jewish Congress, but deep in his guts, he knew that if you really wanted to make serious changes, invest in a small group of people, an immense amount of money, over a long time, make sure they get a great education, and you will see the results of that happening. And Edgar did both. He supported the large organizations, but he made the investment also in the individual. But more than anything, Adam would have said to me that he thanks Hillel for being the platform which enabled Adam to understand his father, to understand what were the things that turned his father on. His visits with his father to the campuses, his meeting with the young students on the campuses, the glint in Edgar's eyes when he was questioned by these young people, the impact of Edgar's answers on these young people with things that had an unbelievable effect on Adam and got him very, very involved with Hillel in Israel. Adam would have wanted me to say thank you to two Yossis, to Yossi Chikhanova, the former head, the former chairman of the board of the Hillels of Israel, and Yossi Goldman, the longtime director who oversaw the spread of Hillels in Israel. He would have wanted to thank the staff of Hillel today and the Madrichim for what they are doing. And Adam would have been talking about his personal loss of a father. When I talk about Edgar, for me it's not a personal loss. I was not a member of the family. I didn't see him constantly. For me, with the loss of Edgar was a public loss. And you know that in Jewish thought and in Jewish law, there is a distinction in how one mourns a private loss and how one mourns a public loss. In a private loss, mourning begins with the extreme of abstaining from everything on the day of the death of the person you're mourning. You're not even expected to pray on that day. You move from that to 7 days of mourning in which you don't go out of your home, you don't wear shoes, you don't cut your hair, you don't look into a mirror, and you move from those 7 days to 30 days, the Shloshim, where you go out of your home, where you do certain things but you still don't do certain things. And then you move to the year of mourning, which is also more relaxed. In other words, in a personal loss, there is a diminishing of the sense of pain. Not so in the public loss. We use an example of public loss in Jewish thought, the mourning over the temple. It works the other way around. You begin with 3 weeks in which you don't go to entertainment, but you do eat meat, and you do quite a lot of things. And you move to the 9 days where you don't drink liquor, even if it's made by Seagrams. And you don't eat meat, and you mourn. And then you move to the week of Tisha B'Av, which is even stricter, and you end with the day of Tisha B'Av, which is a day of fasting. Now, why is that? Because in the personal loss, man has to be enabled to overcome the pain of personal loss. But when you lose something of public importance, what's important is that you recognize the icon, you recognize the importance, and you make sure that you build up to it gradually so that the memory remains strong. For me, Edgar's passing was a public loss. I can list the times when I know that they're approaching. Pesach is coming. I know of a day before Pesach that I spent with Edgar that I will never forget. And I think of Edgar, and on that day, I'll spend the entire day thinking of Edgar. He was a public loss because he was a public figure. And he was a public figure because of his vision. I heard today, very interestingly, that 12 years ago, Edgar took a foundation off the shelf that was known as the Edgar Bronfman Foundation and changed its name to the Samuel Bronfman Foundation. Now, why? What a Jewish move. He instinctively understood that if you want to impact the future, you have to begin by tying yourself to your past. That's why Edgar was a fanatic for education. That's why he pushed us in Hillel to increase the knowledge of Jewish students. Because linking to the past is the only way in which you can guarantee a vibrant future. If you build something that is based in the present, it cannot have Jewish meaning. It's only when you link yourself to the past and have a vision for the future that you create something of deep value. That is why, my friends, in Hebrew the words kadima and kodem are from the same root. Kadima, you want a future, you want an investment in the future, make sure you begin by rooting yourself in your past. Edgar's vision, as he said to me so often, was to ensure a continued significant renaissance of the Jewish people. Not the Jewish religion, the Jewish people. Not something that began with me, but something that is continued from the past, but also something that is significant, that can talk in a language that is meaningful today. Those are the lessons that I learned from that wonderful mentor. Edgar, I miss you. And I do want to tell you, the 79th joke that you told me on that flight from San Francisco to New York was probably the best joke I ever heard in my life. Thank you all very much.
To sing a song of Rabbi Shlomo Karlebach, who was a rabbi who went out to the people, to Russia and Jews around the world. It's called Leman Achai V'Re'ai, which is, I sing for my brothers and friends. Nothing more appropriate than this song here. Shalom, בקשתו.
I'd like now to introduce Yigal Avrahami, the president of the Israeli Bronfman Youth Fellowships, to say a few words.
Distinguished guests, although I met Edgar for the first time only 2 years ago, the moment I really want to thank him for was one little, though very significant moment during my trip to the United States. As an Amit Bronfman in 2000, our visit to the Simchat Torah congregation in New York, a warm place for religious LGBT Jews. What was for me at first just another synagogue visit was actually, in retrospect, a milestone in my young adult life. For the first time in my life, Israel's flag, the Pride flag, and the Torah Ark were under the same roof. Growing up in a Masoreti family, I had never seen my Jewish identity going side by side with my gay sexual identity. For too many years, it was a contradiction for me. Today, as an activist, I speak about my coming out process with high school students. When asked about Judaism and LGBTs, or about the way I keep my Jewish identity today as a secular gay, I always go back to this little moment. It was definitely a defining moment in my life. And this moment was a Bronfman moment. I believe that every one of the over 300 Israeli Amitim and alumni has his or her own little, though very significant moment. With the loss of a person, we wish to commemorate his way and his legacy. The way I choose to make a place for the Jewish world in my life is directly influenced by what I experienced as a participant in Amitei Bronfman. And therefore, my life has been impacted by Edgar's moral perception that led him to establish this program. His legacy has significantly contributed to shaping my friends and my own Jewish identity.
It is now my great honor to call upon the leader of the Labour Party and the opposition, Knesset member Isaak Herzog.
Matthew, dear friends who are gathered here from all over the world and Israel, to pay tribute to a great, great Jew. There are very few people who one can describe as Moses Montefiore of a generation. Clearly, Edgar was one of them, perhaps one of the very few in the last 150 years of the Montefiore saga. He wasn't a builder, he was a doer. And how does one become a Moses Montefiore? After all, there are many Jewish leaders all over the world who are doing great things throughout the generation. But one can single out very few of them who say, he is the Moses Montefiore of the generation. Well, first of all, it starts from something from within. And I think Edgar had a leadership quality from childhood. And clearly, growing up in a unique community out there in Montreal, which wasn't the most central community of Jewish communities, however, a close-knit community, a very Zionist community, an ardent community with great challenges of his childhood as well. And I think that's what crafted him to become a leader. And thereafter, he was a leader in whatever he has done. And whatever he has done, wherever he touched, he had a golden touch. First of all, he was a leader in business. He succeeded greatly in business. He turned Seagram into a huge success. And thereafter, wherever he invested, such as in Challenge, in Edgar, and in other ventures, he was a leader. People knew Edgar Bronfman is around, and when he is investing there, it must be good. And thereafter, slowly but surely, he grew up to become one of the greatest leaders of the Jewish world as such in the generations of the 80s and 90s and onwards. And that period was an earth-shattering period. Continents shattered and moved. Walls fell. And all of a sudden, you needed Jewish leadership to deal with the most painful and important tasks of all. Immigration, Jewish immigration, taking care of Jews out there beyond the Iron Curtain, dealing with the German government on reparations, on touching the most painful parts of the Holocaust, which were untouched until then, and emanated slowly but surely within the corridors of the United Nations and the international organizations who've started working on it. And thereafter, the immigration of Ethiopian Jews from the heartland of Africa here to the State of Israel, and dealing with governments and presidents and administrations and becoming your brother's keeper. Edgar was all of this and much more than that, because he encompassed not only political skill and maneuvering what was termed as Jewish power, and indeed using all the tools that it needed, even if some people believed in the protocols of Zion. Well, if it's for the good cause, he did it. And thereafter, of course, not only that, but putting content into what it means Jewish life. I went to Cornell in the mid-70s, and that's why I was a young Israeli exposed to Hillel. And all of a sudden I got to understand that there's a club of Jewish students where everybody gathers together and somehow keeps Shabbat and have a Kiddush. And I must say that when I heard that Edgar took over and became the sponsor of Hillel, I thought it was magnificent, because clearly the issue of Jewish continuity, Jewish identity, Jewish pride, Jewish solidarity, solidarity with Israel, solidarity of Jewish values, clearly that was something missing out there in the discussion. And all of a sudden, Edgar took it as a leader and placed it back on the map. And all over the world, and especially on campuses in the United States, it's something that doesn't leave you forever. Everybody remembers his alumni, everybody remembers his fraternity, everybody remembers his or hers Hillel. And I think that is what symbolizes Edgar most. A combination of great support for Israel and its leadership and its army and what it symbolizes, and huge, huge impetus and importance into what it means Jewish life out there all over the globe, wherever it is, in Limmud, in Hillel, in leadership, and so forth and so on. My late father, President Chaim Herzog, had a unique relationship with Edgar. That during the term of my father's presidency, the 10-year-long term of his presidency, Edgar was the #1 Jewish leader of the World Jewish Congress, and whatever he did. I came to Edgar with Yitzhak Rabin. Matthew was there in 1992. It was a unique experience. And I saw these two great men sitting and talking, and clearly you felt in good hands. And Yossi Chechanover was with us, and many others. And I felt that it's my duty to be here. I'm coming from a memorial service to a great, great, unique Israeli, Yigal Allon, 34 years to his passing away, on the shores of Lake Galilee, and I felt that I have to be here. And Yigal Allon wrote something which we are still learning from. He said that the only way to keep our national strength and capability as a nation is by having kelim shluvim, converged tools. You cannot have might only through the tank or the plane. And you cannot have spirit only through education. You have to combine all of them. And a nation's strength is judged by the capability of encompassing everything together in merged tools: education and culture and identity and social cohesiveness, and challenging the ability to absorb people from all over the world into their new homeland, and dealing with the pains of the past and looking for the future, and building an army and having a united, strong Jewish diaspora, which is defendable and proud of itself. Well, as a partner for Yigal Allon, I would take Edgar Bronfman for what he did, for the service to the Jewish people and the State of Israel. We are all extremely grateful for that, and may I express it with deep emotions, just like Yuli Edelstein did on his part of the political spectrum. May I add my part of the political spectrum and say there's a national consensus on Edgar Bronfman. May he rest in peace.
Now we are privileged to have with us tonight Edgar Bronfman's son, Matthew Bronfman. Matthew needs little introduction to an Israeli audience. He has become a leader in the Israeli business community and in the Jewish philanthropic community, showing through it his strong faith in Israel. Thank you, Matthew, for joining us here tonight in Jerusalem.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. I feel a little bit like everything has been said, but just not yet by everyone. One of the things that hasn't really been talked about is my dad's sense of humor. He loved a good joke. And I'm reminded, and excuse me if this is a little off color, but my father gave a speech in Boston about 25 years ago, and the speech was over, and he ran to the men's room and was doing what one does in the men's room, and the gentleman next to him turned to him and said, "Edgar, that was just the right length." And my father looked at him and he said, "I hope you're talking about my speech." And I will do my best to make this speech just the right length, not too long. I do want to thank Steve and Ronit and the Jerusalem Post. I want to, of course, thank James and the Israel Museum, my partner Aaron, my partner Shulam, and everybody else who is here to celebrate my father and his life. When we did the memorial in New York at the end of January at Lincoln Center, there were about 2,000 people there, and I was sitting backstage, and this gets a little bit, Avram, to what you said, and that I was sitting there thinking that on the one hand, we're there celebrating this almost larger-than-life public person, and on the other hand, we're celebrating the life of my dad, just my dad. And and frankly, I was sitting there with my older brother on one side and my son Jeremy on the other, and I had a little trouble reconciling those two people. And in a way, they were two different people. There was the public Edgar, who you've heard so much about tonight, and then there was the private Edgar, the family man with 7 children and 24 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren and 1 on the way. Yeah, kol hakavod. He took that commandment, and I guess we all have, actually, so I have 7 of my own. And he really did, he loved family. At the end of the day, in the last few years of his life, as he stepped back from, certainly from business, he'd stepped back for a while and even slowed down a little bit on the foundation, but what really mattered to him was his family and making sure that we all stayed together. But I do want to mention just a couple of quick stories, and partly because I just came from a week traveling with the AJC. We were in Azerbaijan and in Athens, and in both places, I was told stories about my dad and the impact he has had on people's lives. The first was from the Israeli ambassador to Baku. Now, you may not think that Baku is a particularly important posting today, but remember, Israel gets 40% of its energy from Baku, from Azerbaijan, so those relationships are very important. But the minute the ambassador said to me, he was a young person in the Foreign Service in Switzerland when the Swiss bank issues were starting, and my father was leading that campaign. And he had the opportunity to meet my dad, and he was a young Israeli posted in Switzerland, and he couldn't imagine that this person from New York would come and would take this interest and spend his time and his effort with the passion that my father did. And he said, you know, Matthew, I have to tell you that we got a letter one day, and in the letter was a picture of your father and a bullet. This was a hate letter. This wasn't anything nice, and yet my father never stopped. He never stopped pursuing, as he said in the video, justice and truth for the Jewish people, for the victims of the Holocaust. And then when I got to Greece, and I'm meeting with the leaders of the Jewish community, it's a very small community, only about 5,000 people, and we were meeting with the leadership, and they pointed to, they had in their room, they had the former presidents of up on the wall of the Greek governing body, and they pointed to one of them, and he said, you know, in 1982, right after about a year after my father became head of the World Jewish Congress, in 1982, Papandreou, who was no friend of Israel, no friend of the United States, referred to Israelis and equated them to Nazis. And it was August, and my father called Israel Singer, and they got on an airplane, they flew to Athens, and they picked up the head of the local Jewish community, and they flew to Corfu, where Papandreou was on holiday. And they tracked him down and insisted on a meeting with him, and went to see him while he was on holiday in the middle of August in Corfu, and spent a few hours talking to him and making him understand the danger of those kinds of comments and the reality of the situation in Israel. And it was that kind of effort and that kind of courage and that kind of determination that lingers on all these years later, and certainly rings in my ears as I go around the world working, whether it's in Limmud or for the AJC. I am incredibly proud to be able to continue some of the work my father did. And finally, I just want to say that, you know, my father was far from perfect. None of us are perfect. And one of the things I love about Judaism, I find it a miracle that every one of our heroes is flawed. But it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Because how can we relate to those who aren't flawed? And my dad was flawed, our heroes are flawed, but what makes it brilliant in my mind is that
Wow. Thank you very much, Matthew. It was very touching. נסיים את הערב בשירת ההמנון הלאומי שלנו הישראלי, התקווה.
Please rise for the singing of Hatikva.
תודה רבה לכם. תודה רבה לכולם. על ההשתתפות בערב המרגש הזה. תודה לך, מתיו.
Thank you for coming to this very moving evening. We wish you a good night, Laila Tov, and safe travels.